What is code switching? Code switching is a complex topic to unravel. If you were to look up the term in a dictionary, you'd discover this tool described as the practice of alternating between two or more languages or varieties of language in conversation. In essence, it's the language, mannerisms, and body language we use when in the company of peers from a different class and/or race. And that is an article by Jazmine Reed-Clark for the Financial Diet. And it is an article called The Cost of Code Switching for Black Women in the Workplace. It was actually published on the 20th of April, 2020. Hello, everybody. It's Tuesday. It's a brand new week, so you know you're getting a brand new episode of the Toya Talks podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about code switching. But before I progress with this episode, I do need to ask you, especially if you're a new listener to the Toya Talks podcast, to listen to season 2, episode 3, Showing Up to Work as Yourself. And I published that episode on the 7th of April, 2020. Now, in order to fully appreciate this episode, I definitely feel as though you need to listen to the episode Showing Up to Work as Yourself. I talk about boundaries and, in essence, showing up to work as yourself. But there's no way that I could have published that episode without doing this one. And this one was always an episode I wanted to do. So you can imagine when I stumbled across the article in the Financial Diet, talk about code switching, and I read it, I enjoyed it, I then started doing the treatment for this episode. So I really hope that you enjoy it. And more importantly, that it resonates with you guys. And you know what we do here on the Toya Talks podcast and the Toya Talks platform. We aid, guide and assist, including advising Black women how to navigate the world of work safely and in turn highlight the path of their own success, of our success. And you know, when talking about the world of work, there's so many things that need to be covered. And I'd like to think that I'm on path of covering a lot of those topics. But before we kind of deep dive into this episode, I do want to let you guys know that if I'm sounding a little bit different, it's because I'm trying out a new mic. I'm of the opinion that if you are creating something great, in order for others to invest in you, you have to invest in yourself. Investing in yourself can mean financially, emotionally, psychologically, and all of those things. And for me, you know, the podcast has been amazing. I've, you know, watched the numbers grow and I have seen success with the podcast. And there's still some milestones to reach, but in reaching those milestones, it's important that I invest in the sound quality. So let me know, guys, if you're enjoying the sound quality, if you like it, if you don't like it, if you prefer me to use the old mic. I'm very open to constructive criticism and quite happy to switch to the mic that we're used to. So now that I've kind of explained and given like quite a high level overview of the definition of code switching, when I read the article and I re-listened to the episode, season 2, episode 3, Showing Up to Work as Yourself, I asked myself a question. I said to myself, Toya, can you give examples of your code switching? Because we've all had to do it. I don't think there is a Black woman alive, a successful Black woman alive, that can say that she's reached the peak of success without having to code switch. And for me, it's about degree. I see code switching as a survival mechanism to an extent, but it's about how it is used. I think that we all code switch in an interview. I think that is kind of a shared space where we can all agree that in interviews we have code switched. And it can be anything from your mannerisms, your body language, as the definition has described, but also the accent and how you speak. I think that we are conditioned as Black women to code switch, right? Your parents tell you, oh, keep your head down low, or don't necessarily be yourself effectively in order to survive in the world of work. So we're preconditioned to code switch. We're preconditioned to survive. And a lot of that has come from our parents who have come over to, you know, a brand new country. My parents are first generation immigrants and they came over here to survive, and they were in survival mode. So everything, including me and my siblings, we were conditioned that survival will get you under the radar and therefore you're less likely to kind of do yourself out of a job. But the problem is we're never taught about the degree of code switching or when to switch it off, if that makes sense. There's a saying that my friend says, and she goes, so-and-so or this person is not on code. And I think that relates to code switching. So if I speak a bit about my own code switching, when I started in the world of work, especially on the career path in my early 20s, I knew that I had to code switch. I came from Tottenham, and I always tell you guys, it's not the lottery funded Tottenham that you see today. It was the hood. It was what quote unquote people would call the ghetto. Now there's been a lot of an investment in money, and when you go there, it's a very different Tottenham to the Tottenham I grew up in. But I'm really proud of where I've come from, and I'm really proud that my life started off in Tottenham. But the reality is, when I would go to work and people would say, "Oh, what part of London are you from?" I'd always say North London, and if they say which part of North London, I would be like near wherever was remote from Tottenham. That's code switching. And people could turn around and say, well, is it because you wasn't proud of where you're from? But no, I was just very aware of judgment. And I was very aware that in order to feel like I was part of them, I had to code switch. I had to almost go under the radar. I had to change who I was. Now, I'm very different now. But I think that that's just because I have a very good understanding and a distinct understanding of self. I think that also as well, I have seen the changing tide of the appreciation of blackness. We all remember in school when being African was quote unquote not cool, whereas now everybody is remembering where they're from or where they originated from. Do you understand what I mean? It was a different time when I was growing up. But, you know, the most kind of, you know, my earliest memory of code switching, but not knowing it was code switching, was when I was studying for my AS levels. And I was really close with my dad. My dad's like my best friend, and God rest his soul, he's passed away. But my parents never taught me and my brothers our native language. So I'm Nigerian, I'm Igbo. And I remember asking my dad, you know, why haven't you taught us Igbo? Because you'd go to school and you'd see people from different cultures speaking their language to each other. And people would say, oh, do you know your language? And I'd be like, yeah, I understand it, but I have difficulty speaking it. I remember asking the question to my dad, and my dad said, well, we didn't want to spoil your accent. And I just remember looking at him like, well, how can you teach me my Igbo language, spoil my accent, when in school they're trying to teach me French? But again, it kind of boils down to our parents' generation of them fully understanding that to survive in a white man's world, they had to distance themselves, in essence, from their culture and in a way from their blackness. And when I think about it now, I'm very upset that that's how my parents thought that they had to survive, because society had taught them that, right? You know, my parents would sit there and tell me stories of people mocking their accent and things like that. So it would only, you know, for me, logically thinking, when they, you know, had children, they want for what they believe is the best is to distance us from what white people wouldn't accept. And yeah, so whenever I speak about it, the reason I stutter is it just blows my mind, because it's almost like you're happy for us to learn a second language like French or Spanish, but you're not worried about our accent changing because the white man's dictated that that's a language, that's the preferred language, when in fact my mother tongue is, English. But when you dig down to who I am and the essence of who I am, and I'm a Nigerian Igbo woman, and, you know, having that conversation, and, you know, I remember it as clear as day, and I could see the regret in my father's eyes, because it's almost like they wanted us to be rich and proud in our culture, but yet the language is part of that culture, that's intrinsic to the culture, but you didn't want to teach me and my siblings. And the thing is, when you speak to other Nigerians, especially Igbo people, when you speak to them, and even in Clubhouse, I remember I joined a few rooms where that's kind of like how we were raised in general, you know, not every Igbo, but people you speak to, if they can't speak Igbo and you ask them the reason why, they'll tell you that it was a deliberate attempt by their parents for whatever reason, and one of them being not to spoil our accent, almost thinking that if we were distanced a little bit from our culture, we should still be proud of our culture, but yet we, you know, wanting to pursue an acceptance that ultimately, as Black people, we're never going to get, you know, from a society that's built to protect white people, like a society that constructed, the workplace is constructed for the benefit of white people. So we're never. And what do you mean by acceptance? What does acceptance even mean? Anyway, so I remember during my A-levels, I did philosophy and ethics as one of the subjects. So I did psychology, history, philosophy and ethics, and I can't remember what the other... Psychology, history, philosophy and ethics. I did one more, but I can't remember. English literature, sorry. And in my philosophy and ethics, it was split up between two teachers. So ethics was taught by Miss Ed. Is it Miss Ed? I can't remember. I think her name... Why do I think her name's Miss Ed? I think it's Miss Ed. And philosophy was taught by Mr. Parnham. And Mr. Parnham used to speak a lot like this. Hello, Toya. Please take a seat here. Today we're going to discuss Plato and Aristotle. That's how he would talk. And I would always like mock his voice, like his accent at home. Because it was just so posh. Like, I'm from Ends, like we don't talk like that. And my dad would always say to me, make sure you copy how Mr. Parnham speaks. You need to speak like Mr. Parnham. So I would come home and I'd be speaking like him, but I was mocking him. I didn't feel like I needed to speak like him to be understood. But when I think about it now, I think that my dad wanted me to learn to speak like Mr. Parnham. He was a white, upper class man. And so that when I go into the world of work, I would speak like him. And that would kind of be me code switching in order to survive. When I think about it, that's the reason why. Otherwise, why else would my father ask me to, learn to speak like Mr. Parnham? I'm learning to speak like myself. But it's not a bad thing, because ultimately my parents and a lot of our parents came over to the UK for a better life. They came here to survive. They came here to give us more than what they had and to give us a chance at education and a better life all round. But I think what that did is it planted a seed in me that my accent wasn't okay, or that in order to be accepted, I needed to speak like them and not like me. And to be honest with you, I think I speak fine. And again, when I'm with my friends, I'm very comfortable. I do speak a bit of slang and stuff like that. But for the most part, I'm just very comfortable in who I am and the way I speak. But when I have gone into job interviews, I definitely recognize, especially in my early 20s, that my accent did change, and it was reminiscent of Mr. Parnham. And I always found that, I'd get a lot of the, like the stereotype, and every time I say it, it literally is caught at the back of my throat. And they'll say, oh, what part of London are you from? Oh, you speak really well. And I used to think that was a compliment, but it isn't a compliment, because actually, why shouldn't I speak well? And what is it that is different that makes you think that I speak well? And it's because I was code switching. Because if I was to speak how I speak on the podcast is how I talk, right? But I do recognize that in my 20s, I didn't always used to speak like this. I used to speak a little bit more, and I used to use a lot of big words for no reason, superfluous. But I just used to, even that word superfluous. I used to use big words for no reason, but it was almost like to show them that I'm equally on your level and I understand these big words because I went to school too. And I don't know, I definitely feel as though, to an extent, even now, I code switch. So when I tell you guys to do your due diligence and stuff, in a way that is code switching, because I'm an ambivert, right? So I have introvert and extrovert personality traits, but I would say I do have leanings a bit more to the extrovert side, depending on the environment and the atmosphere or whatever. But ordinarily, when you go into the world of work, you would want to be a bit more open, a bit more warm, to almost show that, you're coming in peace type thing. A lot of us, you don't want the ag, but you have to, in a way, code switch, because being anything other than... You have to code switch because being too much of the real you will play into a lot of their stereotypes. So I would say, honestly, if I put my hands up, during my probation period, I code switch. Let me not lie. And then I show up to work as myself. After the probation period, that's the gospel truth. Because for me, I am still conditioned to accept and understand. During the probation period, you are not safe. So that means it's kind of playing into my survival instinct that is kicking in to survive and pass the probation period. So I am a lot more reserved. I am a lot more, I would say the due diligence that is done during the probation period requires me to be a little bit more quieter, to be able to do the observation. And I'm a lot more polite, more than I would be. Do you understand? But still creating the burn folders and the feedback folders and all of that. But it's, for me, it's part of the plan of getting through the probation, because there's a lot of people who can testify of not passing their probation period because they haven't kind of navigated the right way. There are keys and tips to passing your probation period. And I'm actually going to do a masterclass on it. There is for me anyway, it works. Every single place I've worked for, since I've put these things in place, I've always passed my probation period. And then after the 6 months or the 3 months probation period, I turn up to work as myself. And even though it is I can't even get the words out, but you know what I mean? Even though it's not 100% me, because to be 100% me, I have to trust you 100%. It's a toned down version of me, but it is still a version that's very reminiscent of me, if that makes sense. And I think that code switching is seen as quite negative because it's almost perceived as though you have to sell, you have to sell a part of your soul. And I don't actually agree with it. I believe that you need to be methodical and you need to be strategic about your code switching. So I know that if I change my accent, it's not going to stay for 6 months because at some point I'm going to revert to my accent. But I have noticed that I speak without slang, if you like. But in a way, I think that you should be able to do that. And it's okay to do that because it's showing the fact that at work, you're in a professional environment and therefore you're not 100% comfortable because you know that this is work and this is what pays the bills. Whereas when you're in your safe space, you can speak however you like without judgment, especially because you know that there's people there that completely understand. And it's about still knowing who you are. And I think I'm able to tap dance between the code switching in the probation period to who I am as Toya quite well because I have a very, very good understanding of self. And I think that it's difficult when you're still trying to find out who you are. You're code switching and it's almost like you're in a conflict with yourself. So I would always say the focus should be to develop and understand who you are as a person. Then if you code switch, understand and have an honest conversation with yourself. I know I'm code switching. I know I'm trying to survive. The essence of the code switching is to get past my probation. And once I do that, I can show up to work as myself. Season 2, episode 3, showing up to work as yourself, Toy Talks podcast. Do you understand? Even though you are code switching, you still have to set boundaries. I think that it's so imperative that your boundaries are set from the offset. Does that make sense? It is so important because if you don't set those boundaries early and use the excuse, oh, I'm code switching, it's very hard to pull it back. And I've often said that on different episodes. And I do talk about the setting of boundaries in season 2, episode 3. So I don't want you to think that because you have code switched that you're not supposed to set boundaries, because that's part and parcel of your due diligence. I definitely think that there has been situations whereby I can't be 100% of myself, and you shouldn't ever be 100% of yourself in the workplace. I personally don't agree with it, but equally I can see the negative side of that as well. So if you guys remember in the last episode of the Toy Talks podcast, where I was speaking about Gary, and those of you who haven't listened, it is called Dear Black Women, Competency is Your Highest Form of Currency. And I was telling you guys about Gary. And I'm actually going to tell you what happened towards the end of last week with Gary as well, because my plan of just kind of letting him unravel himself came to a head last week, but I'll share that a little bit later in this episode. But I think one of the things that I was frustrated about with Gary is that I felt like I couldn't be angry, and I was fucking fuming. But I knew that because of the stereotype of black women that white people have, being angry, I would automatically be the angry black woman. So in a way, I had to code switch in that situation to strategically manage it in a professional way, to be able to make sure that my point came across, but more importantly, that I maintained my professionalism. And it is frustrating when you just can't be angry and be angry at a situation rather than be angry fearing the stereotype and the labels that are placed on you. It is really, really difficult. And I'm not here to say or to pretend that it isn't, because it is. And constantly in the workplace, we're having to kind of meander and tap dance around the stereotypes that we know they have of us as black women. And it makes work hard. It does. I'm not going to sit here and lie. But this is why I give you the practical skills of navigating the world of work, which includes how to set those boundaries, which includes kind of how I have dealt with predominantly white people in the workplace and non-black people as well, who have sought to make my work life difficult. You know, as I was reading the article by Jazmine Reed Clark, she talks about diluting of blackness, you know, as kind of an understanding of what code switching is, like diluting that blackness when there is no one else around who is black. And I don't actually agree with that, because I think for me, it's not about diluting my blackness. My blackness it stands as it is. Do you understand? My blackness isn't necessarily in the way I talk or the way I carry myself. It is who I am. I embody my blackness, if that makes sense. I think we need to be really, really careful when we talk about code switching in a negative way, especially when you know that your end goal is to whatever. I definitely don't understand people who continue to code switch the degrees that they do past their probation, because my thing is, okay, so what is your end goal in this code switch? What are you trying to obtain? Because any code switching that is done for the acceptance by white people is dangerous, because at that point you're willing to dilute yourself. At that point, you know, you're willing to completely forget the essence of who you are with the pursuit or in the pursuit of being accepted. And I think what we need to, as black women, need to understand is, and I know this can sound controversial, but I don't think black people or non-black people will ever accept us for who we are. I actually don't believe that. I don't think they ever will. And the reason I don't is because racism is just such an intrinsic fabric of our society that the majority will do anything to protect racism and therefore protect their white privilege. And if that is the case, how can we then be accepted? I think for us, the goal shouldn't be acceptance. The goal should be progression. The goal should be to be able to be in a position of authority, power, and influence. That should be the goal. I think when you look to others for acceptance, you're looking for people to take you as you are. Like, they should just do that intrinsically anyway. Do you know what I mean? Like, what do you have to sell? What about your soul needs to be sold? What do you need to give away to be accepted? Because if as you stand, you're not accepted, then what about you needs to change? Do you understand? Those are the questions that I ask. And my thing is never about being accepted, but also recognizing how difficult it is for, as black women, as we navigate the world of work. And navigating the world of work remotely it has its own nuances as well, because I feel like people are a little bit more chilled and a little bit more laid back, and therefore open the gates wider, in my opinion, to disrespect. Because now we're all at home, you're probably sitting in your oversized jumper, you're in your PJs, and immediately, you know, your barriers are lowered a little bit. You're remote working, you know, it's different, but I still think you need to maintain those same boundaries, because I feel like that relaxedness makes you more complicit to code switch if you feel like you still need to be accepted. Remote working and code switching is dangerous in my opinion. I think that people will always have their perception of you, and it's more difficult now, especially if you're starting a new role remotely, because you're trying to make a good impression, and that is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But I just wonder, what are you compromising to make that good impression outside of doing your job to your best ability? So that's just something to think about. My earliest memory of code switching in a workplace, and I say earliest insofar as like the earliest stage of my career, was when I was working at Goldman Sachs. So you can imagine, how I grew up. I never knew that places like Goldman Sachs exist. And you don't unless you're kind of in that field, right? So when, I went through the hoops I needed to go through to get a role there, I remember my first week at Goldman. Now, if you know anything about me, you'll know that I don't wear suits. I feel suits make me feel like I'm suffocating. I feel constipated just looking at a suit. I can't wear it. The idea that somebody could ever attempt to force me to wear a suit makes me feel sick. Like, I just can't wear a suit. Now, I don't mind like the co-wards, like, the nice stuff that you would wear. Okay, cool. But an actual suit, and you know what I mean? Like when I talk about a suit, like a pencil skirt, all of them ones that I just don't like it. And it's very much because I'm a free spirit as well. And I just feel it's just quite stuffy and restricted. So you can imagine then going to work for someone like Goldman Sachs. That is like their uniform. And I remember going into work. And when I think about this, I regress and I just really think about how I felt at the time, because I remember it like it was yesterday. And I was going into work and I was standing in the lift, wearing my flats, and everyone in there, when people just look like money, they just look like money, they smelled like money. Me and my perfume from the pharmacy, I was there, existing with them in the lift. And I looked at them and I looked down at me. And I was like, I don't fit in here. I don't belong. I actually do not belong here. All these people look like they belong, and they're willing to conform to feel like they belong. They're all in their high-powered suits, shoulder pads pointing to the sky, shoes shinier than anything you've seen before. And I just remember feeling like a tramp. I'm not gonna lie, I felt like a tramp. Let me just be honest here. I felt like a tramp. And yeah, I was earning good money at Goldman Sachs, but I had a lot of debts. Okay, I had a lot of debts to pay. But I made a decision as I walked out of that lift that I'm not gonna feel like that again. I'm not gonna feel small. I'm not gonna feel like I don't belong here. I'm not gonna feel like I'm that imposter syndrome. I didn't want to feel that way. So after work, I went to Louboutin. I don't know why I had any business going there, because the corns on my feet now, I'm telling you, are attributed to the Louboutins that I purchased. I've got a lot of corns. Kay calls them cornfields. I've got a lot of them on each foot. Because for me, I was willing to make myself uncomfortable. I was willing to code switch to fit in. So I bought them. I'll never forget them. They were beige. And they were pointy, and all my feet were cramped. Like a crisp packet. It was just cramped inside. And then I remember going into Dorothy Perkins. I bought a suit and everything. And then I bought quite a few suits from Dorothy Perkins. I bought a suit from, it was in Selfridges. I can't remember the name. It was a boutique in Selfridges. And I was so excited to go to work. I bought a new bag, new designer handbag. And I walked into work, and honestly, I felt like finally they're going to accept me. They're going to know I'm one of them. I buckled on the way to work about 4 times because them shoes are fucking high. Number 2, if you see how I felt like I couldn't breathe in my suit, the shirt, I couldn't breathe. I was uncomfortable, but I felt like this is what you have to do to it. You have to get uncomfortable to be comfortable around these people. They will accept you. They will see you as one of them. Your code switching will be acknowledged. And I was so miserable at Goldman Sachs. And I'm not sitting here saying, oh, it's just because of the way I dressed. And no, It was because I had code switched so much that even though I had an understanding of who I wasn't strong enough in character to understand that who I am is good enough and who I am is deserving of where I am. And I'm deserving to be here. Like, I've worked hard to be here. I've made those sacrifices. And actually, how people see you is based on their own perception. But I didn't care. You know, I would go out after work with my friends just to almost show them all the stuff that I have. And there were, you know, there might be a person that they've brought along that I've never met. And the person might say, where do you work? Oh, Goldman Sachs. And I looked like Goldman Sachs, a sack of fucking potatoes. And, you know, as I continued working there and stuff, it became very apparent that it wasn't for me on so many levels, okay? I'm just giving you an example of my code switching. But I felt my code switching was really expensive as well. And it traumatized me. The amount of money I had to spend for me to feel like I needed to be accepted. And with every new pair of shoes and every new shirt and every new suit, my accent changed. I remember one time I had like an American twang as well. That's how fucking coded I was. I was just crazy. And I remember like just going through the day at work. Imagine being on your period in a fucking stiff suit as well. It was a fucking annoying. And my tights were still from Primark as well. So it was like I never fully immersed myself in the code switch. And nothing wrong with Primark tights, but they're fucking itchy in the summer. And there were other reasons why I left Goldman, but one of the main reason is it just wasn't who I was. It didn't represent the essence of who I was. I just didn't feel like Toya. I just didn't feel like Toya. And I made a promise to myself when I left Goldman that wherever I would end up in a place whereby I felt like I can bring myself to work as well. And that could be in any form. But I needed to bring me. And, you know, at work, I remember, like, you know, anyone who's worked at Goldman, they have everything there. You don't really have to leave the building. They've done it so that you can kind of stay there from morning till night. And I just remember, and that's what I used to do. Like, I'd get there early and leave late. And I could never walk in my heels. My legs were always itching me because of my tights. My shirt was like, I felt like it was choking me. And when I made the decision to leave, it felt like spiritually I was able to breathe. I learned so much and it was a great opportunity working there, don't get me wrong. And it laid the foundations for everything else that was to come. But what I learned the most there was I code switched and I did dilute my blackness. And I did it when there was no other black people around. And when there were black people around, they diluted their blackness as well. So we were all a pool of diluted blackness. And it scarred me. I was a little bit traumatized by it because my treatment from when I was myself was very different when I code switched. I felt it was a false sense of security that had been created for me. And I think that it's one of the reasons why now, you know, I make a point of never wearing a suit. If anyone who follows me on social media or followed me before the lockdown, they know, like, especially on Snapchat, how I dress and everything. I'm very quirky. And that's who I am. That's the essence of who I am. And when I became comfortable in myself, I understood that code switching only worked for me during a certain time. And that code switching would be during a probation period. I know why I was doing it. I never lost who I was. It was more of a mechanism in which to manipulate the probation process. And it worked for me because I then developed a good understanding of who I was. And I knew the things that I shouldn't and wouldn't compromise on. And I was on code as a black woman. I knew what it was. And code switching outside of a probation period is just not who I am. How I talk is how I talk. There's a difference between being professional and being unprofessional. And being unprofessional is kind of bringing that other side of me to work that has no place there. Because if I'm going to set those boundaries, they're not going to be in line with bringing the other side to me that's more comfortable when I know these people were only brought together because we're working together, not for any other reason. Because if I had a choice, I wouldn't choose these people to spend my working life with. But that's the way the world of work works. And whether you like it or not, you do have to adapt to different climates of work. But what we're saying is, what degree of adaptation are you doing? You know, how far are you going? Are you selling your soul, quote unquote, to be accepted? Are you, you know, forgetting what the essence of you is? Because that to me is worse. And that's what I did at Goldman Sachs. You know, nothing about me. I mean, I was eating sushi. I don't fucking like sushi. Like, sushi literally, like, I don't know how people eat it and say they've had lunch. And that's what I would do. I told you guys that I started drinking coffee at work. I never used to drink coffee. I hated it. But it was how I felt that I needed to fit in, because everybody would congregate in the canteen and they would go, oh, I'm just going for a coffee. Even when I would smoke, I smoked at work just to fit in, because everyone was going for a ciggy break, a fag break. I'm just going for a fag break. And, you know, like I told you guys that I had a really bad chest infection. Because I was doing something that wasn't natural to me to do. Do you understand? The coffee thing stuck, because actually it helps me in the morning wake up, and I love coffee. But I compromised myself so much that it affected my health. And sometimes I feel like code switching can become very expensive, because it can affect you emotionally, psychologically. And there is an emotional cost to code switching. Losing yourself in your pursuit of acceptance can be really expensive, because there is a level of, I don't want to say self-hate, but a rejection of who you are fundamentally as a person. And I never ever wanted to feel like I would lose myself. I think I'd rather leave an organization than to lose who I am and the essence of who I am, because who I am is always good enough, because that's how God has made me. And I think there's some people that use code switching to distance themselves from their blackness, the essence of who they are. That is a form of, you know, in my opinion, self-hate. I remember somebody reaching out to me a while ago and saying to me that sometimes, you know, that person, she said that she was quite a quiet person, and she found that that was even a problem, because that was actually who she was. And she was told, you know, you're not being a team player, you're not part of the team, you're not wanting to be part of the team, when she's just a quiet person. She says, Toya, how can I navigate the workplace and maintain who I am as a person who is quite quiet? And I said to her, listen, you can still be a quiet person, but play the game of work. And sometimes it's about how you do it. So when a white person, because again, I've told you guys before, I predominantly work around white people, and there is like Asian people and Latino people as well. But when I talk about the construct of the workplace, it's been constructed to the benefit of white people. So a lot of the senior managers that I've worked with or for are white. So in that instance, what I did say to the young lady was, listen, you have to be smart about how you navigate work and still be yourself. So it is sometimes about, you know, you participating in certain things, and you don't have to be the loudest person in the room. You just have to have a voice and know when to use it. But being completely quiet is isolating. And for me personally, I see it as if someone's quiet, they're quiet. It doesn't make them any less of a team player. But for some reason, when you don't fulfill the stereotype that some white people have of you, they see it as a problem as well. Like, if you are the stereotype, it's a problem. If you're not the stereotype, it's an issue, because you're not the stereotype they thought you were. Again, it's often about how you navigate, because I know various quiet people who are a bit more reserved but are still really successful in the workplace, and it's because they play the game. They know that they're quiet, so they'll do certain things. So like one of my friends, he'll go on holiday and he'll bring back like loads of sweets and chocolates for everybody. Do you understand? So he's still being that team player, but he's navigating smartly. He knows that actually these people, all they eat is tea, crumpet and biscuits. So if that's what I need to bring back from holiday, I'm going to do it. Now, being that way remote working is a lot more difficult. And what I will say is you have to be engaging. You have to come out of your comfort zone a little bit. You know, I know that in my workplace, often my boss might do like coffee afternoons and stuff like that. And I'll be honest, where I work, I'm a lot more reserved. And that's because it's just so political. However, I use my voice when it needs to be used, okay? And I assert myself when I need to, but for the most part, I'm a lot more reserved. And that means like sometimes, I mean, for instance, I hadn't spoken in a while during like a team meeting, and my boss had asked us about how we feel about this present lockdown. So I raised my hands on Teams and I just said, listen, it's a bit confusing because the borders are still open and it sends out mixed messaging. So I managed to give my opinion, and everyone was a little bit surprised because obviously they haven't heard me speak in a while. But I speak when I feel like it will be a bit more impactful as well. So even after that meeting, my boss sent me a message and she was saying, Toya, great points that you raised during the team meeting. And it was nice to hear your point of view. You know, like, and now when I speak, I'm listened to because they know I'm only going to speak when there is something of value to say. So it is about understanding the dynamic of where you work, having done your due diligence and understanding who are the people of influence that you have to kind of consider as you're navigating the world of work. Remember I said the word consider and not impress. I don't believe in the word like going to impress people because people have different measures of impressing. It's about considering the influence people have and how you navigate that person so that you're influenced in the right way. There was another place that I was working and it was a difficult place because, again, quite a political place, but I was very much a minority in that workplace. And I remember I had my end of year review and I'd done some really, really good contracts. I'd contract managed quite a few high visibility contracts. And one of the critiques that I had from my boss was to work on my soft skills. And I'm not even going to lie to you, I had never heard of that before. And I didn't understand it because when you say working on my soft skills, are you trying to tell me that I only present hard skills? And I actually asked her that. And I said, what do you mean? And she says, well, Toya, I find you to be very, you're very straight. And I said, what, black and white? She goes, yeah. And sometimes you have to acknowledge that there's grey. And, everybody really gets on with you. You're a very pleasant person to be around and talk to. You add a lot of value to the team, but I definitely feel that you need to work on your soft skills. And I know what it was. It was because I wasn't going to have tea and coffee with them. I wasn't part of the tea and coffee brigade and the rich tea biscuit brigade. I know that part of it was because my boss would invite people around her house for barbecues and I just wasn't the person that would go there. And I know that that really bothered her because for her it was a form of control and I wasn't playing that game. And it really bothered me when she said that because it's acting into the stereotype of black women being tough, being strong, when in fact we're just black women with equally the same emotions as white women. But it's almost like even that's not good enough now, always looking for an excuse. So she asked me if I could respond to some of the critiques on my end of year review. And I still have it here because when I do my next Toya Talks Live, we're going to talk about this soft skill bullshit. And I actually wrote, my response basically says, I've never come across the term soft skills. And the assumption, therefore, is that I bring hard skills to the workplace. I have a generally good relationship with my peers and my colleagues and my internal and external stakeholders. But I would like to understand what soft skills and what courses there are available for me to work on these soft skills if I'm being told that they need to be worked on. But more importantly, I'd like to understand what positive hard skills I have. Yeah, I wrote it there. I don't care. I wrote it there. Because I feel like white people are very quick to label you. Very, very quick. And not back it up with anything. It's all deep-rooted in stereotype, which is deep-rooted in racism. Let's really be honest here. But it's the way you challenge these things. White people code switch all the time, but their code switching is different because they appropriate. So appropriate switch, if that's a word. They do it, and they do it like Adele, for instance. We would do a hairstyle and be told that, oh, why have you changed your hair? Oh, is that your natural hair? Oh, why have you been hiding your hair? But a white person would change their hairstyle. And they could do cornrows, they could do any African inspired hairstyle, and it will be seen as fashion forward. And workplaces need to work on that shit, because that's rooted in racism, appropriation and privilege, white privilege that is. And no matter how much as black people we try to code switch, we're still black. Do you understand? Like, they still see you. You know when they say, oh, we don't see race. They see you. They see race. People say they can't see race as an opportunity to hide the deep-rooted conversations that need to be had. Let's just have that conversation. So I saw an article in the Daily Mail, or the Mail Online. Barrister who called Afro case young woman a stroppy teenager of colour is sacked after refusing to delete his tweet. Barrister John Holbrook expelled from the chambers for refusing to delete a tweet. He referred to a black teenage girl as a stroppy teenager of colour. Ruby Williams won £8,500 in settlement from school for alleged discrimination. A barrister has been expelled from his chambers for calling a black girl a stroppy teenager of colour. John Holbrook had been commenting on the case of Ruby Williams, who won £8,500 in an out-of-court settlement from her school for alleged discrimination. Teachers had sent her home because of her afro hair. Her case was brought by the Equality and Human Rights Commission under the Equality Act in 2018 and featured in a video. But in a tweet about it, Mr. Holbrook said the Equality Act undermines school discipline by empowering the stroppy teenager of colour. Cornerstone barristers yesterday ended Mr. Brooks' association with their chambers after he refused to take down the offending online posts from January the 17th. Miss Williams, now 19 and a student at the University of Manchester, told the Daily Mail last night, "I am pleased that the chambers have taken this seriously and acted quickly. I'm not against people expressing their opinions, but it was unfair for him to talk about what I went through at the age of 14 and to call me a stroppy teenager of colour for simply calling out a discriminatory policy. I was not surprised at all when he said that. I know there are lots of people out there who have those thoughts, but he had such confidence to say what he did publicly, even with the position he holds. I had hoped he would have taken it down and possibly even apologised. He has now written 2 articles continuing to challenge the validity of the case." And this is the thing, isn't it? Because I'm talking about code switching, but we're watching. I've just read this article. Beautiful Afro-Caribbean hair this young lady has, and she's been discriminated in her school because of her hair. And I'll let you guys read that article, in your own time. And she's challenged it under the Equality Act, and she won. And a barrister calls her a stroppy teenager of colour. And I just hope that she doesn't feel that she has to code switch in the world of work, i.e. changing her hairstyle to be accepted, because I know that I've done that. And I got to a point where I realised, do you know what? I don't care. I just don't care anymore. And I don't know if you guys would remember, those of you who followed me on Snapchat, I really found it uncomfortable wearing wigs. Now, I'm a wig girl. I love wig all day, every day. Wigs are just easy, comfortable, and in the morning, it just makes life easier. But I really wanted to grow my natural hair and felt like I couldn't switch between a wig and my natural hair without question. And those questions are so uncomfortable that I just didn't even want to have to deal with it, because already you're having to deal with navigating what I just couldn't be bothered. So I just kept the wigs until kind of like going into this pandemic. I'm like, right, I'm able to have my natural hair. I'm able to grow my hair. And every remote interview I was doing, I made sure I didn't wear a wig, because I said to myself, my job is not to make white people comfortable, but equally, it's not my job to educate white people either. Oh, is that your natural hair? Yes, full stop. Even to answer that question. I don't actually have to answer that question. And what I will say is, I always talk about being a subject matter expert in what you do, the leverage it gives you in terms of negotiating, things like that. But there is another form of leverage it gives you. It gives you the leverage of power. When you are the subject matter expert in what you do, you limit code switching. Because they know that you are the best of the best. You are the subject matter expert. Often the single point of failure. You are the oracle of all knowledge when it comes to this subject. You know it more than your boss. There is a power that it gives you, and it's a protection over having to code switch as well. And I know that sounds crazy, but it is the truth. And you know you're always going to get the truth on the Toy Talks podcast, but it's true. And I think that white people will always challenge you. They will always ask questions. And I think that's just the nature of a lot of white people that I work with. It's the nature of who they are. But the power to just not need to answer the question, or even just shutting it down. Like, there is a strength in being the subject matter expert, but it takes a while. It takes time. So it's the bit that happens in between before you become this all-encompassing subject matter expert. And I think in this episode, I want you guys to really be accountable to yourselves for code switching. I think we need to hold ourselves accountable for how far we take our code switching. Because you've got to remember, if you code switch too much, when you then default to who you are, it can bring about more questions from the people you have been code switching in front of, if that makes sense. I think that it's important to have this conversation. I think it's important to continue to talk about stuff like this and to let people know and make people aware that they are code switching, even when sometimes they don't realise they're doing it. Like I said, I want you to listen to this episode in conjunction to season 2, episode 3, showing up to work as yourself. It's very important that you do. There's no way I can talk about showing up to work as your authentic self without speaking about code switching, because it's part and parcel of showing up to work, if that makes sense. So I want to kind of follow off from last week's episode. And if you guys remember last week's episode, Dear Black Women, Competency is Your Highest Form of Currency. And I told you guys about Gary. For those of you who haven't listened, please go ahead and listen so that the next part or the next segment of this episode makes sense. So I decided, as I told you guys, to let Gary be his own undoing. Didn't take long, guys. So my boss had a conversation with Gary off her own back and basically said to him he needs to concentrate on his own contracts and basically stop interfering in mine. That even though we have the same supplier, we have 2 separate contracts to manage. And my boss, Deborah, sent me a message. She emailed me and asked me if I could call her. She goes, she goes, Toy, can you please call me? It's just about the separation between you and Gary's contract. And I've had a conversation with him and I want you to be aware of that conversation. So I rang her and she goes, I just wanted to reinforce the fact that you're very valued, Toya. And I wanted to reinforce the fact that there needs to be a separation between your 2 contracts and the blurred lines come from Gary and it doesn't make me comfortable. And I've had that conversation. So I thanked her, whatever. The next day, the supplier calls me in a panic and says to me, Toya, oh my God, I know you're not managing Gary's contract, but our invoice is late. Gary only submitted the invoice day before yesterday and it takes 2 weeks to process. When you were managing Gary's contract before he was doing it, we never had this issue. And when we did, you escalated it and you managed it properly and he's not doing the same. Can you do anything to help? So I said to the supplier, listen, I don't get involved in Gary's contract and how he chooses to manage it is a matter for him. If you have an issue with the invoice or how he's managed the invoicing as part of his contract management, you need to take that up with him. I really don't want to get involved, but, I appreciate the call, etc., etc. And in that moment, I gave Gary more grace than he would ever give me, because I know up until my boss speaking to him, Gary's been stabbing me in the back because I've heard things through the grapevine. He cuts me out of emails and then somehow they make their way to me. So I know the devil that I'm dealing with Gary. So I thought to myself, do you know what? I'm going to message Gary and let Gary know I've had this conversation. So Gary, when I messaged him, I said, just to let you know, your supplier called me. This is what I said, just to give you the heads up. So Gary was like, oh, Toy, have you got a few minutes? I really need to speak to you. I said, no problem. So I rang him. Gary was like, I haven't spoken to you since last week. In my head, I was like, yes, because you're a dickhead and I'm staying away from you. I said, oh, Gary, you asked me to call you. I'm assuming it's to reiterate kind of what I've sent to you. And he was like, oh, Deborah rang me and she basically said that our contracts are separate. I said, yeah, they are separate. He was like, I guess, it was just that, you know, I know that you have a lot of knowledge. And I just stopped him dead. I said, Gary, listen, I'm quite happy to support you as a team member and make sure that if I'm able to help you to deliver on your contract, I'm quite willing to do that, because we work collectively as a team, and there's 6 or 7 of us in this team. But what I'm not going to do is allow you to finish off what you tried to start last week. That will never happen. And then, you know, when somebody looks like you've poured water on them, because the plan that he had was to take my contracts away from me, because he knows his ones are coming to an end. So he's thinking, shit, what's going to happen to him? Are they going to renew him? Are they going to get rid of him? So he thought stabbing me in the back is what is now going to serve him, not realizing that I've observed everything that's happened, and I know he's going to be his own undoing. I know I'm a subject matter expert in what I do. I know the leverage I yield. I don't need to go and be fighting him. But one thing that I will say, and I guess it's on the topic of the whole code switching, is one of the reasons when I explored why I got so angry, and obviously didn't show him that anger, but privately, was because I couldn't show that anger. I wasn't allowed to show that anger, because to show that anger is, number one, to show that he's got the better of me, because effectively it would just feed into his pathetic ego. But also, I'm very aware of the stereotype as a black woman, and I didn't want to kind of walk in that stereotype. I didn't want anything to do with that stereotype. So I felt even more pressured to deal with it in a professional manner, which I did. Then also acknowledging that with Gary, I know his biggest problem is the fact that as a black woman, I'm really good at what I do, and I'm not allowing him to use me to download all the knowledge I have and pass it off as his own. That's his real frustration. His real frustration is that he can't manage me, and he wants to, because that dominating side of his ancestral lineage of owning black people, of feeling like they can stand on top of our shoulders and own us, I'm not allowing him to do it. And I'm not fighting him. I'm not arguing with him. I'm just using my brain and strategically moving. Checkmate. Fucking checkmate. Because now he has no visibility of my contract. I've moved my meetings so he's not anywhere near my meetings. And he may not like me, but he will fucking respect me. Do you understand? He will respect me. And you can go over and above to ignore me out of emails. Those emails will reach me. And he realises that now. Do you know what it must have taken for my boss to go and speak to him? God knows the essence of that conversation. But it was enough for her to know that, you know what, if she doesn't nip this whole Gary thing in the bud, it's going to be an issue. Because the option to leave is there for me. But equally, she needs me. I'm not saying I'm indispensable, because I don't think anyone in an organisation is. But this guy strategically basically tried to get me out of my job. He tried to make me as uncomfortable as possible as he tried to dominate me in the workplace. He tried to bully me. That's what he tried. If you want to call it in its bare nakedness, he tried it and it wasn't going to work. And I could have gone toe to toe with him and it would have been so easy to do. But the reality is, when you act like a bull in a china shop and you're driven by emotion and you're driven by all those emotions and you start typing, and you're unable to control that emotion, you're going to end up doing yourself out of a job. You're going to end up getting yourself into a lot of trouble. And I haven't had to do a lot. I've just had to allow Gary to be himself. I'd done my due diligence on him. I knew there was a matter of time before he'll fall flat in his face. And he has done. Because as at this morning, the supplier made a complaint about him processing the invoice late and therefore their invoice being paid late. And I know this because the same supplier put me on copy, put my boss on copy. Checkmate. Guys, I feel bad, but I don't. I don't know. I just think that with work and navigating the world of work, it is difficult and often quite exhausting. But I think I've always said to you guys, and I've always been very honest, that the blueprint doesn't change with Oyibo people. It doesn't. But what needs to be adapted and amended is how we as black women navigate white people and the white construct that has been created to protect them, and using it and manipulating it to get what we want out of it and then moving on. I I feel like my success hasn't just come from one organization. It's come from an accumulation of organizations of where I've learned and developed my skills to be able to go on to other organizations and work my way up. And now I can sit here and say, you know, I am a subject matter expert in commercial contract management. I can sit here and say, yes, I'm a consultant. I can sit here and say, yes, I've worked in XYZ places and I've had exposure to XYZ contracts of values, you know, I never thought was quite in my reach. But it has come from seeing my career as a project, being strategic, code switching to an extent and knowing why I am code switching it off and then turning up to work as myself, setting those boundaries and being effective in navigating the world of work. And if there is anything that I want you to learn from me in this episode is understanding code switching and being accountable to yourself of when you're doing it and how far you're taking it and not losing sight of who you are. And when we talk about blackness, you know, for me, it's more about self, you know, like being proud of who you are. Just because put it this way, code switching doesn't mean you're not proud of who you are. Code switching means that you are trying to navigate work and survive, but it's about doing it in the right way and not allowing your whole work history to be defined by code switching. Because if that's what it is, when you default to who you are, that's going to be a problem for you. Like that's going to be a big identity issue for you in the workplace. And I hope that you take this episode in the spirit in which I'm delivering it to you. Anyway, we're going to move on to some dilemmas now. So let me go to the dilemmas. I'm going to be reading 2 dilemmas. I haven't read them in full. So we will be reading them together for the first time. So here goes. Hey Toya, hope you're well. I work in financial services and my company was brought over 3 years ago. And we've always known, I think you mean bought over 3 years ago, and we've always known their synergy targets that by the 3rd year in November 2020, where there was risk of job losses for my team. Nothing has been confirmed and there is only the usual whispers, but some are expecting we all merge into one of the existing teams and others assume we might get cut. My dilemma is basically on whether I should jump ship now and look for new opportunities in this turmoil market or just ride it out until the end and either see if a few of us are kept or get made redundant, as my years of service would be 5 years. As well as stay employed, I'm in need of the stability, proof of employment and income, as I'm also a sponsor for my husband's UK visa, which we renew in November coincidentally. From my knowledge and what I can gather, they will need to keep at least some of my team beyond November 2020, as we're a specialist field and the new company that bought us over don't yet have the resources to support our platform wholly. This is just an assumption though. And plot twist, we all received a sudden email from our COO 2 weeks ago and they are making emergency cuts, had us all in a panic. This resulted in 4 non-key members of my team being made redundant and further redundancy notices are next expected in June 2020. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Sorry, try to keep it detailed and short. And then she sent me a second email. Just to add, I also have bought all your masterclasses and they've been extremely helpful. Thank you for sharing your experiences and knowledge with us. Okay, so first of all, if you've bought all my masterclasses, the one that is more pertinent to your situation would be the redundancy masterclass, which is available on the toyatalks.com website. So your question to me is whether you should jump ship now and look for new opportunities in this turmoil market or just ride it out until the end and see kind of what happens. This is what I'm going to say to you. You've been working in this organization for 5 years, right? So already you have passed the threshold measure, which is 2 years of continuous employment to qualify for redundancy payout. Why would you jump ship if you could be made redundant? Because if I was in your position, what I would do is I'd just ride it out. Of course I'd ride it out because if I get made redundant, I'm going to get a lump sum, even if it's a statutory redundancy, right? But if I already know that my organisation is probably going to go through a period of redundancies, I'd be looking for work now anyway. Just be looking. Go to interviews. But I wouldn't advise you to jump ship before you get paid for your service. Like you've sacrificed 5 years of your life working in an organization. For me, if I know we're going through redundancy, I'll make sure it's me that you make redundant, yes. I can get my lump sum and move on. And I think that if you get anything from my redundancy masterclass, I talk about strategies and mitigating redundancies as well. Like they need to explain the criteria they're using to make you redundant, things like that. And I think if you've bought these masterclasses, especially the redundancy masterclass, everything you're asking me in your dilemma is in that masterclass. But just to give you an overview, you said that you are sponsoring you're a sponsor for your husband's visa, which is due to be renewed in November. So you sent this email on the 28th of January, which is only a few days ago. So I would stay in this organization and be looking for jobs. Yeah, there is turmoil, it's a turbulent market. So by the time, if you were to be made redundant, hopefully it would coincide with you getting a new role anyway. I would say to you that it's difficult, right? Because you could be offered a new role, but you haven't been made redundant. But then my thing would be, you need to be looking for new roles that are paying you more with better terms and conditions than the current role you're in. I don't believe in job security. I don't think job security exists anymore, just simply because we're in a pandemic. And I think a lot of us are seeing that organisations can make you redundant at the drop of a hat. But I get that what you're trying to say to me is you have a lot more responsibility. So it's not easy for you to kind of just jump ship. But you shouldn't. I think you should ride this out as much as possible, exploring other opportunities within your market or sector or whatever, a next opportunity looks like for you. And hopefully, if you do get made redundant, they'll pay you out. But because you're already looking for roles and stuff in the market, you'll know what's happening. And hopefully you'll be going through interview processes and get offered a job. That's kind of how I would deal with it. And hopefully that helps. But please, 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 if you haven't purchased the Redundancy Masterclass, you need to. And if you have, then you need to rewatch it, because it really does answer all of the questions in this dilemma. Right, we have another dilemma. You people don't realise that I'm dyslexic. You guys here are writing me 4-page letter. Anyway, let's go. Let's try. Hell! Please, guys, straight to the point. These 4-page letters, it's not good for me, and I'm short-sighted as well. Do you know how close I have to be to the laptop? Hey, Toya, I hope you're well. First of all, I'd like to say a huge thank you. I've only recently discovered your platform, and you truly have been a blessing. However, I can't help but think that things are too late for me. I wish I had discovered you so much sooner. I really do need to give you some context. I am a fashion graduate from the West Midlands originally. I moved to Hampshire for university and never left. I definitely take responsibility for being careless and unprofessional in my younger years. This shows as I have been let go of all my jobs post-university. However, my last job, I was managed out, where they had no grounds to fire me, ended up taking a settlement. I've always been the only black girl in the office and thought I'd learn how to navigate, but your episodes in season 1, I realised not well enough. I'm currently in a crisis and I'm not sure if you can help me, but I'd love to hear your thoughts anyway. After going through a traumatic legal proceedings with my last employer, I changed from corporate to creative industries. I currently work in the public sector for a charity in arts education. I took a rather big pay cut coming from commercial sales and account management, but for the sake of my mental health, I thought it would be worth it. I have over 10 years hospitality experience working from the age of 15, consider myself a customer service expert, and over 4 years of sales experience across 2 sectors. I'm still the only black person, but given my personal interest in the arts, I was pleased to take this transition. In the beginning, everything was great. I work in a small team of 4, which consists of the program manager, coordinator, and other staff member who is equal to myself. I did everything wrong. Familiarized myself with them by telling them the ins and outs of my personal life, added them on socials. God. Basically all the don'ts. What the hell? Do you know anywhere I've worked, I've never added anyone on socials unless I knew there would be a friend outside of work, if that makes sense. But even then, I only added them after we left. I felt vulnerable as my girlfriend had cheated on me with a friend and we still had to live together for 7 months. My grandfather passed away 6 weeks after the breakup and I'd never felt so low. My team became a refuge as my home life was so turbulent. Oh my God. Just before the pandemic hit, I managed to get out of my living situation with my ex and move in with a friend from university. For me, I thought this would be a fresh start. Work extended my probation period, as they had said. Even though my work was fine, I sometimes wasn't engaged. These are the people that you were telling your whole life story to, extended your probation. I explained exactly what had been going on in my personal life. Why would you do that? And that hopefully things would improve now that I had moved into a new place. The pandemic was a very difficult time, as my family all live in the West Midlands. I did not see them for 10 months. In addition, I suffer from polycystic ovarian syndrome rather severely, and was on and off multiple forms of contraception for around 6 months. This heavily affects my moods, as it counteracts my hormone imbalance with more hormones, making me a literal emotional wreck, unable to control my emotions. Side effects are also depression, mood swings, etc. This makes me extremely frustrated, as prior to my diagnosis, just before I started this job, I was always able to control this. I passed my probation, but work had said they still wanted to keep me on a monitoring framework, as they still wanted to keep an eye on me. Well, you didn't pass your probation then, did you? Because they just extended it with caveats. Every week, I would have to report to my manager or member of the 123 team. As I work for a charity, HR and senior leadership have dual roles, to talk through every single thing I had done that week. Oh, fuck. I'm sorry, I just can't believe what I'm reading. I made sure to keep up with this, but I did make it clear after the 4th week that I was not happy with the process. Well, why did you engage in the process then if you wasn't happy with it? Given that they had said my work was not the issue. In the summer of last year, my grandfather's wife passed suddenly, 6 months after my grandfather passing. My whole family was devastated, as it happened out of nowhere, and none of us could be together due to COVID. This was my second lockdown funeral, as my great uncle had passed away a few months prior, so definitely was difficult to watch. As part of my self-recovery, I started selling food through Instagram in her memory to keep me busy, as at this point I hadn't seen my family for over 7 months. My manager liked, shared, and even promoted my side hustle, for God's sake, on social media. After a few weeks, my manager was off, so my review was taken by the HR or Learning and Education Manager. I'd spoken about my completed task, but at the end of the meeting, she had asked if my food side hustle was too much. Oh, God. I assured her it wasn't, as it was only a few hours at the weekend and helping me grieve and pay off some university debt. Fucking too much information. Less than a month later, after having some annual leave, I was hit with a disciplinary hearing. Of course you were. Of course, I could have told you that. The reasons being having a second job without permission and low activity on my work laptop. I wrote a detailed email explaining my contributions to the organisation, from hosting social events, taking part in buddy schemes in addition to my job. I can't believe this. I'd raised all the health complications I had dealt with, mental health and bereavements. My contract stated that if a second job exceeded 10 hours, I would have to ask for permission. I was not exceeding this and doing it in my own time. I provided evidence of all my work and had not missed a single task. The meeting was chaired by the new CEO, who I was meeting for the first time. She agreed that my side hustle was allowed as part of my well-being, but that it had also been raised that I had a negative attitude. I was enraged. I was enraged as I felt that my managers were open, I don't know what you're saying here, manager were open, and if this was observed, it would have been brought up in my one-to-one meetings. My manager was also refused to get involved when I asked if she was the one who had pushed for the hearing. I was issued with a final written warning and was told that I would have a review in a month's time. 2 days after the CEO had asked me to be involved in the BLM work group to help the company be more inclusive, I felt like I had no choice but to say yes, as I am the only black person in the company and had just given a disciplinary. I made sure to keep my okay, I'm going to just continue reading this because I started, but I'm really frustrated. I made sure to keep my head down and knew that seeing my family at Christmas would be a great reward. I took 3 weeks off and returned in January. I had been anxious the whole time as I knew my review was coming. In my review, held by my manager and same woman HR or learning education manager, definitely is the one who cares who pushed for it. The fact is you're here. They had confirmed that they had seen improvement in my screen activity. Are you fucking serious? And that there were gaps. There were gaps of no activity. She had said she had checked my calendar and couldn't see why there were gaps. She presented me with a spreadsheet showing this in the meeting, with no time for me to revise beforehand. I felt bombarded and unable to defend myself, but advised that I would be the following day. She confirmed that the CEO had fed back that I had really given great insight in race equality within the working group and great positive engagement. She then went on to say that her and my manager had not felt the same. She asked me, why do you think you are more enthusiastic about your work in the BLM working group than the work in your day job? I couldn't believe it. I gave a bullshit answer around the fact of having a voice in the group and adhering to Arts Council guidelines in my day job, but I couldn't believe she would ask a question like that. Well, I can, because you've created no boundaries in the workplace. So they feel they can ask you anything, treat you anyhow. They then went to say that my face during a video call wasn't okay. We have to have our camera on. And when I challenged her, and she said it was just the same as everyone else's, I can't read the rest of this. I'm sorry. It's too long. I can't read the rest of it. I'm so sorry this is so long, but I really wanted you to understand the full extent of my situation. Most of the incidents have been verbal. Since I've started listening to you, I've started to create a burn folder, but it's too late now, which I will continue to build on and create audit trails as things continue to arise. It's too late, babe. I've managed to find a dream role and have submitted my application. I just wanted to ask if the worst happens and I don't get the role, how am I supposed to move forward amicably? And if and hopefully when I do get a new role, how do I leave amicably and voice the victimization? Either way, I just want a peaceful departure when the time comes. If you think it's easier to, voice note, no, I'm not going to do that. Here's my number and I recently added you on Snapchat. Okay. I know this is way too long for the podcast, but okay. So first of all, if you're going to send me dilemmas, can you please be mindful of the fact that you need to just get straight to the point of what the issues are. God, I don't even know where to start. What I'm going to say to you is you need to listen to the podcast from the beginning. You said that you started listening to the podcast. You are responsible for a lot of what's happened here. You haven't navigated at all. You've just existed in a workplace with open arms, It just, I'm sorry. I don't even know. Okay. So to be practical and to give you some positive feedback in terms of positively moving forward, you need to find a new job. It's as simple as that. You need to find a new job. You're on your final warning and now you're telling me about a burn folder. It's too late. It's too late for all of that. You being victimized and things like that. I'm sorry, but you put yourself in that position. And you need to really learn from your errors in this workplace. Otherwise, you're going to go to a new place, which is your dream job, and you're going to be in exactly the same position. You can still be warm and a nice person without having to show and reveal everything about your life. Like, come on. In my workplace, I think the most they know about me is that I live in London. I'm engaged. And that's it. And the only reason why they know I live in London is because I was asked, and I'm quite happy to share that. That doesn't give you no information. And because my ring keeps shining every time I have video calls. Oh, you're married. I'm engaged. That is it. They don't know that I've got 2 brothers. They don't know that my partner is Kenyan. They don't know that I have a platform. They don't know this. They don't know that. Because my question to you is, what do they gain? when you tell people this is my social media, they just use it against you. Look at it now. Your boss was sharing your picture or your business on Instagram, and then when you went to work, as part of your disciplinary, they basically brought up the fact that you hadn't told them you had a second job. I mean, if you don't learn from this, if you do not learn from this, you're going to be in the same position. And you're asking me for advice, and the advice is in each and every podcast that I have released on the Toy Talks platform. It's in each and every one of them. And you said you want a peaceful departure if you leave, then let it be peaceful. You talking about your victimization and everything, you can do that if you get some type of closure from doing that, like when you're leaving, but you are equally responsible for what's gone on in your workplace. And one thing I'm always going to say is, as I help guide, advise you to navigate the world of work, you also have to be accountable for the things that you do wrong that lead to situations just like this. Like, this is unbelievable. Unbelievable. And the worst part, the very worst part of it, during Black Lives Matter, they come to the same person who they've made life hell for and ask you to be the token black woman to educate them as they continue to victimize you. I mean, I can't think of anything. My brain is about to fucking explode. I can't handle what I'm reading. I can't handle it. But again, this is not about wallowing in self-pity. It's about work is not your family, darling. Work is not your family. Wherever it is you work, they are not your family. They are your colleagues. And I think you need to explore why you are so willing to make work your family. And we all go through things. We're all going through things. And it's very easy to cling on to work. But if anything you have learned from this, one of the top things is you need to separate work and your private life. Completely separate them. They know too much about you. It's easy for them to get rid of you. Easy. You made it so easy. So I'm really glad that you found the Toy Talks platform. I'm going to ask you to not kind of beat yourself up. In my early 20s, I was nuts. The way I navigated was crazy. That wasn't navigation. That was just bull in a china shop behavior. And then I learned my lesson. I had to learn it the hard way. And that's why I'm here today with a platform helping, guiding, educating black women how to navigate the world of work and light up the path of their success, because success is attainable to us if we are willing to understand how to navigate strategically in the world of work. You haven't been strategic. You haven't been anything. So to kind of go back and say you've been victimized and yeah, you've built your burn folder, but they've got a bigger one for you. Bigger one, because you've only just started your burn folder. They created one from the beginning. I think that this is one of those roles where you just have to ride it out and be looking for a job and just leave. You need to leave here. There's no progression here. There's nothing here. You can't bring this one back, darling. You've gone too far. They know too much about you. You've exposed yourself and made yourself vulnerable to them. And that is the gospel truth. Like, ordinarily, I'd sit here and be able to kind of walk you through it. But this one it's broken. It's like a shattered egg. You can't put it back together. So it's better that you learn, you grow, you move in that order. Anyway, guys, I'm going to draw this episode to a close for this week. And I'm going to thank each and every one of you for listening. Thank you. If you've gotten this far to the podcast, thank you. And I want to thank all my reoccurring listeners. And I want to thank all my new listeners that have joined the Toy Talks family, as we every Tuesday have a new episode of the Toy Talks podcast. If you are interested in any of the masterclasses that I have on the Toy Talks website, the CV masterclass, the interview masterclass, the negotiation masterclass, mother and daughter masterclass, and most recently added to the collection of masterclasses, the redundancy masterclass, all available on the toytalks.com website. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there. If you want to follow me on social media, you are more than welcome. My personal Instagram page is Toya_Washington. The Toy Talks podcast Instagram page is Toya_Talks. Follow me on Twitter, Toya_W. Or if you would like to follow me on Clubhouse, it's Toya Washington, all one word. Or my favorite social media platform, which is Snapchat, Toya Washington, all one word. If you are listening to me on Apple Podcasts, please rate and review. I read all your reviews. It really helped me out, and I really, really appreciate reading all of your reviews that you leave. And more importantly, if you want me to come and do a talk in your organizations, in your workplaces, obviously I charge. However, I make sure that I educate organizations and get them where they need to be. If you are interested in booking me, then please email hello@toyatalks.com. And I would be more than happy to speak to your organizations. I've done a couple of talks last year as well, and I really enjoyed them. So I'm more than willing to give organizations an opportunity to kind of educate themselves. Every organization has a training budget, so it should come out of that. Anyway, guys, I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to thank you guys again for joining me. My name is Toya Washington, and you have been listening to the Toya Talks podcast.